when around the world, country after country, ruler after ruler, leader after leader, has to recognize that these freedoms are universal and that they should be allowed for every man, woman, and child. No man, woman, or child should be condemned to live in tyranny. So why is this proposition so controversial? Well, there are several objections. One, that you cannot impose democracy. You cannot impose it by bayonet point. You cannot impose it from abroad. This is most certainly true. But the fact of the matter is, if we look around the world, and we look, for instance, at the recent events in Iran, we see something that I think is a fundamental truth. You don't actually have to impose democracy. You have to impose tyranny. If men, women, and children are asked, do they want to have a say in their future, or would they have it dictated to them from on high? They will choose to have a say in their future. And so you don't impose democracy, you impose tyranny. What about the argument that there are people who are perhaps just not ready for democracy? Well, this to me is one of the most patronizing things that one can say. We are ready, but they're not. And by the way, it's been said at various times about a lot of people. It was said once that Latin Americans weren't ready for democracy. They were given to military juntas and coups. They didn't care about democracy. It was once said that Africans didn't care about democracy. They were just too tribal. And of course, it didn't matter to them that they had a right to have a say in their future. And by the way, it was once said of black people, they were too childlike. They didn't care about the vote. They weren't really ready for democracy. Well, of course, everyone is ready for freedom and ready for democracy. It may well be that economic circumstances are such that it makes democracy hard. It may well be that the absence of traditions in democracy make democracy hard. It may well be that the absence of civil society, of a strong fabric to society, makes democracy hard. But saying that democracy is hard and saying that someone is not ready for democracy are two very different things. The idea that there are some who are just not ready for democracy is both patronizing and it is insidious. Third, there's the argument that perhaps countries can go through authoritarian capitalism and do quite well anyway. So why bother with democracy? And of course, the example that's most often given here is China. They're doing quite well, thank you very much, with authoritarian capitalism. But one has to wonder if this is a long-term proposition for success. Because after all, it's awfully hard to tell people that they can think at work, but not at home. And one wonders if the tremendous economic success of China, that is clearly quite extraordinary, is not creating the kinds of strains and stresses in that society that ultimately will not be dealt with by a rigid political system governed from the top down. I don't mean to suggest that China is in danger of collapse, but there's one wonderful thing about democracy. It's big, and it's messy, and it's chaotic. Someone once called it controlled chaos. Well, you might wonder sometimes about the controlled piece. But it is accordion-like. It is capable of giving people institutions in which they can try and resolve their differences peacefully. It is capable of giving people a say in how those differences are resolved. And finally, in the final analysis, if you don't like those who are governing you, you can throw the bombs out. And that, more than anything, is the final. In China, instead, growing strains and stresses from this tremendous economic and social upheaval. You know, we've seen it in many ways. We've seen it recently with these riots among Uyghurs. The people of East Turkmenistan, as the Chinese call it, who are unable to express themselves because if there is difference, and it is in a dictatorial society, there's only one way to deal with it. Somebody suppresses somebody.